Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On behalf of Mata Tripta Guru Kar and Nath Pragas USA, we are pleased to have you in the fourth session of the Sikh Women Book Club today. ਕੁਝ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਵਿਮਨ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਲੱਬ ਦੇ ਉਪਰਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਕੌਸਮਿਸਿਟੀ ਅਤੇ ਨਾਮ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸੈਲਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਕਰੀਬ ਤੋਂ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਜਰਨੀ 'ਚ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵਰਕਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਲੱਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹ ਫਾਊਂਡੇਸ਼ਨਲ ਵਰਕਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਸਿਵਲਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਟਾਈਮਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਵਰਕਸ ਦੀ ਰੈਲੇਵੈਂਸ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸ ਹੈ, ਸ਼ਬਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਰੈਲੇਵੈਂਸ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੇਅਰ 'ਚ ਹਾਂ, ਇੱਕ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵ ਪ੍ਰੇਅਰ 'ਚ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਵਰਕਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਛੁਪੀਆਂ ਹਾਇਰ ਰੈਲਮਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੱਕ ਰੀਚ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾ ਕੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਬਲੈਸਿੰਗ ਅਤੇ ਨਾਮ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸੈਲਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਿਹਤਰ ਰੂਬਰੂ ਕਰਾ ਸਕਣ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਉਪਰਾਲੇ ਦੇ ਤਹਿਤ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਫੋਰਥ ਸੈਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਸਿੱਖ ਵਿਮਨ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਲੱਬ ਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ 3 ਵਰਕਸ ਦੇ ਰਿਵਿਊਜ਼ ਜੋ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਪਹਿਲਾ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਹੈ ਜੋਨਾਥਨ ਲਿਵਿੰਗਸਟਨ ਸੀਗਲ ਰਿਚਰਡ ਬਾਕ ਦੇ ਦੁਆਰਾ ਲਿਖੀ ਗਈ ਇਹ ਬੁੱਕ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਵੈਸਟਰਨ ਵਰਲਡ ਦੀ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਦੀ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਵਰਕ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਹਾਇਰ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਬਰਡ ਦੀ ਨਿਗਾਹ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਇੱਕ ਬਰਡ ਦੇ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਥਰੂ ਰਿਵੀਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਵਰਕ ਦਾ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਬੱਚੀ ਜਸਨੂਰ ਕੌਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਜਸਨੂਰ ਕੌਰ ਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਸਟੇਜ 'ਤੇ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੀ ਹਾਂ।
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Jasnoor Kaur, and the book that I have read and analyzed is Jonathan Livingston Seagull, a piece of literature written by Richard Bach. Before I jump into summarizing this book, I'd like to talk about the author, his accomplishments, and his motives that went into this writing. So he is a diversified author that has written over 20 books. Aside from his writing career, he is a former member of the United States Air Force, where he has flew many fighter jets, and hence igniting his passion for flight and observation. You'll see how his passion comes to play throughout the book within the overall message of spirituality and self-improvement. So moving on to summarize, as I previously mentioned, the title of this book is Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Jonathan is a protagonist in this piece, meaning that he's an advocate for a particular cause, reason, or motive. In this world, he comes from a close-minded flock that strictly believes in traditional methods of flight. So there is no room for techniques or habits that may ultimately move to improve the quality of life and transportation. Furthermore, his flock believes in flying for a reason, which that reason is always food, and not for curiosity or self-improvement or any other way to benefit life. To Jonathan, he sees flying indeed as self-improvement because of his curiosity, and he works on himself to execute difficult dives, and as he succeeds, he attempts to spread his newfound abilities and techniques and teachings to the rest of his flock, which unfortunately does not go his way. The elder gull, or the leader, deems Jonathan as inexperienced and irrelevant and banishes him away from his community towards isolation. So as Jonathan dwells in his lonesome life, he is one day invited to a different realm. In this unique area, he finds that he is more than just his physical limits. He is able to fly effortlessly and happily. He meets similar seagulls who aspire to apprehend new methods of flight, and even acquires a mentor who praises him highly for his skill. With this new flock, the elder gull, aka the leader, named Chiang, taught him how spirituality and deeper understanding can increase his skill of flight even more and his self-improvement. His lesson was to truly comprehend that your true nature is present in this very moment, and perfection comes along with that understanding. Basically, you can transcend past your physical boundaries with this message. As Jonathan took that in, he was able to master his skills that he would never been able to imagine in the beginning of his journey, and he sought to spread these ingenious findings to other seagulls to help take them to another level of peace and understanding. He picked up a pupil by the name of Fletcher, and they taught and learned from one another as they both increased their selves. So as Fletcher became more skilled and as time passed, Jonathan wished to educate his original flock with hopes of acceptance and return. He sends Fletcher and his other students to attempt to spread that message, but unfortunately they faced harsh rejection from the original flock. As they begin to fly back, however, they run into seagulls from Soflock who are curious to learn and enhance their abilities and are looking to spread away from the original ideas and beliefs. So those new seagulls joined the new flock with hopes of self-improvement, and after that it became a trend, and many more seagulls decided to come into Jonathan's circle and basically learn from his teachings of freedom and physical and his mental limitations. And as his following grows, he laments the title of divine bird, but he continues with his teachings because he obviously seeks to educate over titles. With additional time, Jonathan lets Fletcher know that it is time to move on, and Fletcher, obviously being sad, continues his legacy of self-improvement and self-presence. With even more time, however, unfortunately, Jonathan's legacy begins to falter. His teachings of flight began to only be taught and not performed. His original students' graves become holy sites for seagulls to show their meaningless devotion and just as a way to put on some sort of facade. One seagull, Anthony, is frustrated by the deceit and hypocrisy of other seagulls and seeks to truly understand the true meaning of such teachings that are taught, but he thinks that there's no way to pursue that, so results in finding a way to end his life because he sees that there's no point to go on. As he's about to carry that unfortunate mission out, a seagull compliments him on his form and his flight technique, drawing Anthony's attention, and that seagull's name was John. From there, we can make our own conclusion, but hopefully the cycle of this teaching continues as it once began. One prominent message taken from this work is that when your mind, body, spirit, and existence are all synchronized, your harmony and ability to achieve your goals will become effortless. You are able to cross many limitations and succeed towards what you truly desire. We can further enhance our spirituality by not only taking this into account, but also understanding that distractions will never leave your side, and it is up to you to determine how you will persevere through them and not give in to such hindrances. I leave you all with a bit of a long quote from the book itself. Do you have any idea how many lives we must have gone through before we even got the first idea that there is more to life than just eating or fighting or power in the flock? 1,000 lives, John, 10,000. And then another 100 lives until we begin to learn that there is such a thing as perfection, and another 100 again to get the idea that our purpose for living is to find that perfection and show it forth. The same rules holds for us now, of course. We choose our next world through what we learn in this one. Learn nothing and the next world is the same as this one. All the same limitations and lead weights to overcome. Thank you so much, and Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.
Just Noor Kaur, profound words, and you took me back to this book when I read this book, and it was a profound experience, and all that naturally I reminisced today as you were speaking, and you did a great job summarizing the key ideas and the key high points and the low points of the work. And birds are food focused. They live a food focused life. But to Jonathan, flying meant his life. His life was not about food. In fact, he was very much deprived of food several times. But to him, flying was the purpose of his life. And it's interesting to see that what the stance is that the society takes when there are pursuers which are unconventional in nature. So if there are people in the society who are unconventional and they have pursuits, higher pursuits, it's interesting to see how the society titles them and how the society treats them. Almost like outcasts, if I may suggest. And it's interesting to see that the friends that one acquires when one traverses through higher realms are not necessarily the friends that exist with a person or an individual in the lower realms of life. And that's very important. Jasnoor said that beautifully, that Jonathan found new friends in the higher realms. When he went into the higher realms, none of those that who existed with him in the lower realms were there. There were new relationships formed. And then it's interesting to see that, that after some time, titles get bestowed on people who are pursuing excellence. Yet people who themselves want to pursue excellence, that number starts to taper off. And so we go into this habit of ritualism and we carve idols, which we believe that in just adulating the idols we are achieving spirituality, but we're not really undertaking an inner journey, and we fall short until the Anthony comes along, until another Jonathan in the form of Anthony comes along and goes onto the same journey of self-discovery. So a profound book that I deeply encourage you all to experience. It's a very small book, about 80 pages, so Jasnoor, yes. And a lot of them are actually, they have pictures of seagulls flying, etc. So very powerful book. I strongly encourage you all to read it. With that, I will now have Uday Singh play the book review of the second book, which is by Veer Singh's composed Sundari, one of the epic works that flew out of the pen of Bhai Veer Singh. Guneet Kaur was kind enough to record this for us before she left for India. It's a brief video. Let's watch and hear what Guneet has to say.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I'm Guneet Kaur, and for my second reading for this club, I picked up Sundari by Bhai Sahib Bhai Veer Singh Ji. Bhai Veer Singh Ji was born on December 5th, 1872 in Amritsar, Punjab, to Dr. Charan Singh and Bibi Uttam Kaur. As a schoolboy, Bhai Veer Singh Ji spent much of his time with Gyani Hazara Singh, under whom he learned Sanskrit, Persian, and Braj, and was grounded in the science of Sikh exegesis. He was educated under both traditional and modern British educational systems. It was during his time at school, in which he saw many of his fellow Sikh classmates converting to Christianity, that his own faith in Sikh he strengthened, and by noting how Christian missionaries emphasized literary resources, he was able to realize how important of a role they played in influencing a person's core. He married Chatar Kaur at the age of 17 and chose to become a writer. Bhai Veer Singh Ji began taking an interest in the affairs of the Singh Sabha movement and established the Khalsa Tract Society in 1894 to promote its aims. During November of 1899, he started a weekly Punjabi newspaper called the Khalsa Samachar, which is still being published today. He also founded the Punjab and Sindh Bank in 1908 with his friends, which has at least 1526 branches all across India and at least 635 branches in Punjab. He was honored with the Sahitya Academy Award in 1955 and the Padma Bhushan in 1956. Bhai Veer Singh Ji died in Amritsar at the age of 84 on June 10, 1957. The Indian government released a stamp that commemorated Bhai Sahib Ji's 100th birthday in 1972. Bhai Veer Singh Ji's other Punjabi novels include Bijay Singh, published in 1899, Rana Surat Singh, 1919, Baba Naud Singh, published in 1921, and Satwant Kaur, which was published in 2 parts. The first was published in 1900 and the second in 1927. As a writer, he wrote at a time when the Sikh religion, politics, and Punjabi language were under such extreme attacks that Sikhs had begun doubting their way of life. He wrote books about the heroic deeds of the Sikhs during the 18th century in a way that did not devalue other religions, and through his efforts, he was able to raise the Punjabi language to a literary level that it had never previously attained. Soon after Rana Surat Singh had been published in book form, Bhai Veer Singh Ji turned to write shorter poems and lyrics. These include Dil Tarang in 1920, Taral Tapke in 1921, Lahiran Dehar 1921, Motak Hulare in 1922, Bijilian Dehar 1927, and Mere Saiyan Jio in 1953. Through these works, he paved the way for the emergence of the Punjabi poem. One theme that I noticed quite often in this book was bravery. Many of the Sikhs in this story demonstrated courageousness in situations that others were not so brave in. In just the first 10 pages of this novel, Sundari, then named Shrasti, is kidnapped by a Mughal ruler on her wedding day. Her relatives try to bribe him to give her back, but he is not moved. None of them try to negotiate any further with him, out of fear of being arrested. When Shrasti's brother, Balwant Singh, hears of the news, he fearlessly goes to the camp and takes her back. When he comes back, however, his family chides him for rescuing Shrasti because this would set the Mughals onto their track. On the 10th page of the book as well, two sepoys talk of the bravery of the Sikhs. They talk of how the Sikhs would give their lives and sacrifice hundreds more instead of leaving their faith. Another theme that goes along with the theme of bravery in this book is selflessness. Over and over again, I saw how much the Sikhs loved one another, going so far as to put their own lives at stake to rescue their brothers and sisters in the event that one of them were in danger. For example, when Balwant Singh and Sundari were captured, a group of Sikhs went out to rescue them, even though they could have been captured or hurt by the Mughals. Later in the book, Sundari also attempts to heal someone who she knew would hurt her if he found out about her identity as a Sikh. The third theme that I saw most prevalent in this book was devotion. Each member of the Sikh congregation was fully immersed in the teachings of the Guru and was fully devoted to Sikhi. Even when Sundari had been living with her Hindu family, she used to recite Path daily in secret. Her devotion strengthened even further when she was rescued by her brother, and she looked at the Sikhs with inspiration and love. It was the moment that she was rescued and brought back to the congregation that she decided her old life was over and that she would start anew with the Guru as her guider. Throughout the book, many instances came when the Sikhs would have been able to enjoy easier lives had they converted to Islam. All of them, however, demonstrated devotion towards their Guru when they chose to keep their faith instead. The tone and style of this book takes pride in the Sikhs of the day. Someone who may not have known of Bhai Veer Singh Ji and his hopes in writing books like Sundari would have picked up on how the author made an effort to inspire people of who the Sikhs were. He used words that looked on the Sikhs in awe and inspiration, which was meant to instill similar feelings in the audience. For example, on numerous occasions, Bhai Veer Singh Ji would describe Sundari as a ferocious lioness. He also described Hari Singh, one of the Sikhs who was in Sundari and her brother's group, as a fearless lion, as he rode alone through the night to learn more of Sundari and Balwant Singh's fate when they were both captured. Bhai Veer Singh Ji also described the congregation as a whole with words that portrayed them as humble, peaceful beings who belonged to the Guru. For example, he used the words heavenly and blissful to describe the congregation of the Sikhs as they did their morning part and Asadiwar together in the jungle. When Sundari and her brother reunited with the rest of the congregation, he said, then followed a scene of reunion which would be remembered always. One by one, the Sikhs came forward and embraced Balwant Singh with joy and welcomed Shrasti with folded hands and the Khalsa greeting. Soon after, the exchange of greetings and the shouts of jagaras, the Khalsa Sat Sri Akal, echoed all over. Though his word choice is more subtle than my previous example, It unconsciously instilled a sense of bliss and happiness in the reader. The style of this writing did do justice to the content of the text. Bhai Veer Singh Ji's words, which were so in awe of the Sikhs, acted as the spilled thoughts and emotions of the readers who were going on this journey. The Sikhs in this book were remarkably brave and devoted to their faith, and his words definitely helped emphasize this. There were numerous occasions in which they risked their lives for one another, leaving the reader in shock and awe. As he praised the Sikhs, he also respected other religions and faiths. He did not insult them or do them any injustice, which was something that strengthened his overall intent, as it showed how Sikhs respect other faiths. Something that I liked about the book was how it was written. Bhai Veer Singh Ji wrote it in a style that would make it enjoyable for people of all ages. Its language choices and style didn't prevent anyone from picking up the book and reading it. Another thing that I appreciated about it was that it got straight to the point with Sundari's story. Lots of books that I read beat around the bush before they really start, but this was one that was clear and succinct. The most important thing about this book, however, was the story itself. Sundari and the rest of the Khalsa never failed to inspire on each page, and their example leaves a mark on each reader. From getting up before sunrise and doing part to risking their lives for each other, the actions of the people in this book are astounding, but also humbling. What is even more amazing about them is that they stay true to their faith, even when their heads are on the line. They serve as a shining beacon to what Sikhs should be and live like. Personally, when I read this book, there were many instances in which I wanted to stop reading and just do part. Many of the people in this book were very, very inspiring, especially Sundari. One thing that I particularly thought was very inspiring about Sundari was the fact that even as a Hindu, she had great devotion to the Guru, and that she used to secretly recite part. Thank you all for listening to my book talk, and I hope it will have inspired you to pick up Sundari for yourselves. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
But Bhai Sahib's approach to being a missionary also encompassed the inward living, what we call the Shaksi Rani. So Bhai Sahib was a missionary of both the Shaksi Rani and the Panthak Rani. As you know, he wrote several books that encompass his spiritual writings. Guneet made a mention of several of those books. We're very fortunate that in the book club we will be reading at least 2 of his more works. So in relation to Sundari, I would particularly implore the Sikh women to read this book because it appreciates the multifaceted prowess of an enlightened Sikh woman who falls no short of being a goddess figure and thrives in the imagination of several women today in the land of Amritsar, Punjab, as well as elsewhere. Guneet implored us to read this book, so do I. With that, we will now move on to the third review of this session, which is Divani Shamsi Tabrizi, which is a book based on the Divan that was written by Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. I'll use the word Rumi and Maulana interchangeably during my review. And this was translated and introduced by R.A. Nicholson. The original work was composed in Persian, and then it was translated by several individuals, one of whom was R.A. Nicholson, and today we'll be talking about his particular version of the translation. Divani Shamsi Tabrizi is a poetic work that was composed by Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi in remembrance of his spiritual teacher Shams Tabrizi. In Islamic cultures of the Middle East, North Africa and South Asia, a divan is a collection of poems by one author, which usually excludes his or her long poems. So a divan purposely tends to comprise and consist of the relatively shorter poems. And these poems are frequently sung or set to music. They are often composed and collected in the imperial courts of various sultanates, and they are very well known for their ability to inspire. The creation dates of some of the poems in the Divan are not known. However, a major portion of this Divan's poems were written in the initial aftermath of Shams Tabrizi's second disappearance around 1247 century East. In the years that followed until Rumi had overcome his grief over the loss of Shams, this was after 1247, and then another 70 poems in the Divan were written after Rumi had confirmed that Shams was dead, and Rumi dedicated these poems to his then living friend in 1258 by the name of Salah al-Din Zarqub. Now, in as far as the influence of the Divan is concerned, this Divan, as well as other works of Maulana Rumi, have influenced both the Eastern traditions as well as the Western traditions. In as far for the specific influence, for example, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Walt Whitman were acquainted with the Divan, and they were very much inspired by its philosophical mysticism. Many late Victorian and Georgian poets in England were also acquainted with Rumi from Nicholson's translation. So when these works were translated by the Western authors, they become accessible to the Western world, and the Western world took real fancy to Maulana's works. Let's talk about the author, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. He was born at Balkh, which is, I believe, in Afghanistan, on September 30th, 1207. Stories are told of him that when he was 6 years old, he saw visions. He imbued his playmates with philosophy, and he performed extraordinary feats of fasting. He belonged to a family of learned theologians. His family had escaped the Mongol invasion and destruction, and the family traveled extensively in the Muslim lands and performed pilgrimage to Mecca, and finally settled in Konya, which was then part of the Seljuk Empire in Anatolia, Turkey. When his father, Bahauddin Walid, passed away, Rumi succeeded his father in 1231 as professor in religious sciences, and by the age of 24, he had already become an accomplished scholar in religious and positive sciences. And then came 1244. This was the year when Jalaluddin Rumi met a wandering dervish named Shamsuddin of Tabriz. And according to one legend, Shabriz arrived in Konya on a Tuesday morning in November of 1244, where Rumi was supposedly riding upon a donkey, when suddenly a wild mystic grabbed the bridle of the donkey and said, "Which was the greatest, Muhammad or Bayazid Bastami?" Muhammad, of course, refers to the revered Prophet Muhammad, and Bayazid Bastami was a Persian Sufi from north-central Iran who was known to future Sufis as Sultan ul-Arifin. And Bastami is considered to be one of the expositors of the state of Fana. Fana is the notion of dying in mystical union with Allah. And when he asked the question, when Tabrizi asked the questions to Rumi, Rumi replies, Muhammad. And then the mystic asks, then what is the meaning of this? The Prophet said to God, I have not known you as I should have. And Bayazid said, glory be to me. Hearing this, Rumi supposedly fainted. When he woke up, he stepped into enlightenment. And the story is almost very symbolic for a few reasons, not least because of its resemblance to the legend of Paul the Apostle, who stepped into enlightenment as he fell from a donkey on his journey to Damascus in Syria. This meeting proved to be the turning point in Maulana's life. Little bit now about Shams Tabrizi. Tabrizi, or Shamsuddin Muhammad bin Ali bin Malik-e-Dad, or Shams Tabrizi, became the Persian Sufi poet and mystic of the famous poet Rumi. He was the son of Imam Ala al-Din and was inclined towards spirituality right from the childhood. As he grew up, he, as per the Sufi tradition, traversed from place to place in search of spiritual companion. And he was a very introverted person. He would hide his knowledge and his erudition and pretended to be a traveling salesman, making a living by weaving baskets and teaching children. Shams al-Din found his spiritual master in Hazrat Sheikh Abu Bakr, who himself was a passionate Sufi master. And, according to Rumi, Shams had a deep knowledge of alchemy, astronomy, theology, philosophy, and logic. In search of spiritual learning, Shams Tabrizi traveled all over the Middle East, Baghdad, Aleppo, Damascus, Kayseri, Sivas, and so many other places. And when he would travel, he would stay at the inns like merchants because he wanted to hide his true self. He'd never stayed in Sufi lodges. And it is often said that he wove baskets and trouser girdles to earn a living. And he had been a construction worker in his youth, and during his wandering days, he tried to get the construction work, but he wasn't offered at that time because he had a very frail body. And so Shams Tabrizi spent most of his life as a wandering dervish in search of a spiritual companion. He heard famous teachers speak and met Sufi saints, but he did not feel an affinity towards anyone. In his writings, he talks about dreams where Allah assured him that he would find the suitable companion at the right time, and his wanderings led him to Konya, where Rumi lived. He was almost 60 when he arrived at the city on November 29, 1244, where he was destined to meet Rumi. Shams Tabrizi wrote that he had first met Rumi 16 years ago in Syria, where he had heard Rumi speak during a debate or a lecture. He had been favorably inclined towards Rumi, but had felt that Rumi was not then mature enough to comprehend the spirituality of Shams. On that day in November, he was disguised as a merchant, dressed in black from top to toe. Rumi came riding on his mule with his retinue of disciples amidst a busy marketplace, where Shams stopped him with a question, and then the journey unfolded for both. The master found the student, and the student found the master. Shams and Jalaluddin, Rumi, supposedly sat in a chamber for 6 months, discoursing without eating, drinking, or any human needs. After the death of Shams, legend has it that Shams was killed by Rumi's followers because they got extremely jealous of the affiliation that Shams and Rumi had formed with each other. There are certain other records that say that the cause of death was natural, but there are more claims that it was not natural. Regardless of what the reason of the death was, Rumi became a Stoic, and he expressed his love towards Shams through poetry and whirling dances, along with playing the ney or the reed. For almost a decade after meeting Shams Tabrizi, Rumi immersed himself in writing ghazals, whose compilation is known as Divani Shamsi Tabrizi, also called Divani Kabir. The Divan offers more than 44,000 lines of poetry, all on the subject of spiritual love and surrender that Maulana offered to his teacher. Rumi spent most of the later years of life in Anatolia, where he finished 6 volumes of his masterwork, the Masnavi, which is also called the Quran of Persia, the Persian Quran. A little bit about the translator now. Reynold Elaine Nicholson, or R.A. Nicholson, is the author of the work Selected Poems from the Divani Shamsi Tabrizi. He was an eminent English Orientalist. As you know, Oriental Studies is the academic field that studies the Near Eastern and the Far Eastern societies, their cultures, their languages, their history, their archaeology, etc. And he has been considered as one of the greatest scholars and translators of Rumi's works into the English language. He was a professor of Persian who visited reputed universities and is considered to be a leading scholar in Islamic literature and Islamic mysticism. I was surprised to know that he actually studied and translated major Sufi texts from Arabic sources, from Persian sources, from Punjabi sources, from Ottoman Turkish sources to English. So the Western world in particular owes a lot to Mr. Nicholson for the tremendous work that he did. And Nicholson himself wrote 2 very influential books, Literary History of the Arabs and The Mystics of Islam. And now, a very candid submission. about the experiences that I had when I read this book for the first time. And I'll be candid, my first ever reading of this book left me perplexed. I found that unrest and unfulfillment brewed in my mind, for it became apparent to me that this work was way more than the literal words in the English language were conveying. And that there was a layer of personal meaning that I, as the reader, behooved to draw, or even perhaps I was being called to draw. I realized that to partake the gift of this book, it required me to unlearn and learn anew. That my current framework of reading was unequivocally inadequate to tap into this work's import. I was not content with the literal meanings that my conscious mind was drawing from Maulana's words as to, I didn't understand why he was using some of the, I shouldn't say understand, but experience. I wasn't being able to experience the words in the idioms that he was using. For instance, why is he, in the work's 19th ghazal, in the phrase, "At the morning tide a moon appeared in the sky and descended from the sky and gazed on me. Like a falcon which snatches a bird at the time of hunting, that moon snatched me up and coursed over the sky." Why is he referencing the heavenly body not as sun but as moon? While I can allegorically determine that he may be referencing Shams to the moon, but the word Shams itself means the sun, and the sun is no less glorious than the moon. Why should I be content with the choice of the figure of the moon to convey that Rumi was revering, the heavenly spiritual beauty of moon as an apt symbol to depict Shams? Why should I agree to that, or why should I accept that? Or maybe there are days where I was extremely discomforted, but I knew that this was necessary, that the discomfort was necessary to help me succeed in finding my lens. So as I set out to find the teachers whose knowledge and wisdom I could seek to formulate my personal lens, I heard a few, and two of them stood out. And my instinct informed me that they are the ones whom I should listen, and I had a trust that when I would hear their words, that their words would personally enhance my knowledge and therefore my experience. And so I'm pleased to share the names of those two individuals. First is Mr. Doug Marman, who lectures at various universities in North America, and he has over a decade of experience in reading and personally decoding Maulana's works, and he decodes them very authentically, very individually. And I heard a few of his works, and I took to that. The second was Dr. Omid Safi, who is an Iranian-American professor of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Duke University. He served as the director of Duke Islamic Studies Center for about 5 years, and he regularly visits different countries and lectures on Rumi's works. Let me briefly share the teachings here. Mr. Marman, he offers his wisdom around the various lenses of perception, and he informs regarding their opportunities and shortcomings, and clarifies that lenses of perception are not the same as beliefs. They are much beyond that. He deciphers that Maulana himself cautions us and says that our way of seeing and our understanding is holding us back. So Maulana Rumi is basically, per Mr. Marman, saying that the objective way of looking at the world, what Mr. Marman calls the third person lens, the approach of approaching the world through the subjective lens of the phenomena around us and treating that approach to be sufficient, necessary, is not sufficient to perceive Maulana Rumi's works. He says, Mr. Marman says, that we need to find another way of seeing to gain anything at all on the spiritual path. And he says that he understands that without objectivity most people today feel lost. But then he says, Maulana says that great scholars of the age split hair on details of all matters. They know perfectly and completely those sciences that do not concern soul. but as far as what is truly of importance and touches us more closely than anything else, namely our own self, this your scholars don't know. They make statements about everything. This is true and that is not true. This is right and that is wrong. Yet, they do not know their own self, whether it is true or false, whether it is pure or impure, or what the self is going to produce the next moment, and what the self has forgotten. So Maulana Rumi claims that the work of scholarship falls short because the scholar is applying the objective lens most of the times. Dr. Marman says that now let's contrast this third person lens or the objective lens with the subjective lens, and Mr. Marman calls this as the first person lens. The first person lens, it offers a path to wisdom that comes from skin deep personal experience. To master understanding about ourselves, we need to earn wisdom that will come through our mistakes and successes. And all skills are learned this way. So these are the two extreme positions of the pendulum, if I may. And then Dr. Marman says that there is a middle way. The middle way allows us to see ourselves in the other and the other in ourselves. And Dr. Marman calls this as a second lens. And this is what Dr. Marman believes that Maulana Rumi is trying to teach us. For this is the lens. It allows us to freely plant the other in us and the us in the other, such that the wall between the two diffuses into non-being. But you see, it's a very conscious effort, but it's a subjective effort at the same time. So it is the middle position between the extreme two swing positions of the pendulum. Rumi says, I became drunk. Love said, I'll give you another cup, so no other will remain between you and me. So this is when we see us in others and the others we see in you. And this way allows us to experience the other in a way that cannot be seen in any other way. We cannot know what we seek by studying it as an outsider. If we're studying something as being an outsider and we're not making conscious attempt to go inside the person, we will always have these walls and we will never be able to really experience the other. And that's what Dr. Marman invites us to do. This particularly resonated with me. The other perspective that resonated with me, and I call out now Dr. Umeed Safi, who's the revered scholar on Maulana Rumi's works. The beauty about this is that Dr. Safi, he's a revered scholar, and he offers several tenets of his personal experiences that were constructed based on his personal experiencing of Rumi's works. And in addition, his understanding of the three basic religious attitudes mentioned in the Quran, the attitudes of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, of various orders of Sufism, etc., does make him an authoritative yet extremely humble teacher. And in hearing him, I certainly felt I was bestowed with my second teacher who would help me formulate my own experiences around Rumi's works. Now, my search for the third apex of my teacher or teacherhood is still on. I am seeking scholarly works that may have been composed by Sikh scholars and thinkers that narrate the art of Sikh experiencing of this work. I hope I find some translation that has perhaps flown from the pen of a Sikh theologian, a Sikh scholar or a Sikh researcher, and I hopefully will find it soon. Now, at this juncture, I thank my stars for unveiling the presence of two scholars' bodies of knowledge to help me on my path, and I pray that I find my missing side of the triangle soon. I wish to be able to build and deploy my experiencing lens once, of course, I've formulated it completely. And by employing it, I hope to be able to garner a personal perception of this work. And then I want to come to this forum in the presence of Guru and the Guru's Sangat to share my personal experiences of this profound work with you all. Until then, I welcome you all to pick this work and perhaps explore how it speaks to each one of you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We did not have a break at this time, as I understood that we have several chores going on. The Sangat is gracing this occasion as well as is being called to support some others. So we did not have a break, but I presume we have some refreshments outside. We will be closing this session a little in advance of our schedule, but of course not without thanking our speakers for today. Jasnoor Kaur, thank you so much for the wonderful review, succinct, powerful and impactful review that you presented on the splendid work. Guneet Kaur's review on Bhai Veer Singh's work, Sundari, as well as some of the thoughts that I presented on Maulana Rumi's Divani, Shamsi, Tabrizi. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this collective journey. Thank you for sharing your life's moments with us. And, you know, in the Muslim tradition and the Islam tradition, it is said that we only have the amount of the breaths we get is preordained at the time of our birth. And in being here and in sharing your breaths and time with us, this is a very intimate exchange of our relationships here. So with that, I'd like to finally thank you all for coming here, and we look forward to our next session. In 3 weeks, we will meet for the Sikh Women Book Club 5th session. We invite you all to come being a part of that session as well. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.